Oftentimes with my images, I end up creating a soft look that gives a lot of contrast to something. And I want to show you how that can be done. When I do this effect, you will find that the effect is too strong when I'm done. It's always too strong. I want it to be too strong, because then I can dial it down and control it. If it was already at a strength that was somewhat appropriate, it would be difficult to increase it. So I want it to be a little bit too strong to begin with. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to duplicate this layer twice. And I use the keyboard shortcut of Command J, and I think of it as jumping to a new layer. So I'm just going to type that twice. It'd be Control J in Windows. So Command J, got two of them. Now when I end up doing this, the colors in the image usually shift. And to prevent the colors from shifting, I'm going to take that top version of the image and I'm going to change the blending mode to color. And that means the color we end up with in this picture is going to come from the top layer. So the colors in the image aren't going to be able to shift. If I didn't have that top layer set to color, the colors would become too vivid and wouldn't look right, because of what's going to happen on this middle layer. On the middle layer, what I want to do is I'm going to change its mode to a choice called Overlay. And that's going to give this image a lot of contrast. But I want this to be soft contrast, where it makes the image feel nice and soft. And to do so, I'm going to soften it. But I'm not going to do it with the normal blur filter. You could, and it would look okay. But instead, I'm going to go to the Noise menu, and there's a choice in there called Median. And with that, I'm going to bring this up until all the fine detail is gone, but I can still recognize shapes. So I still want to be able to recognize that there's a leg there and and things, but I don't want it to become just a solid blob like that. There we go. And that's giving me this really soft, contrasty look. Then I can just take that middle layer and lower the opacity of it to control how strong this effect is, and how much additional contrast and softness that I want. But that's what I call soft contrast. And I apply that to a lot of my images, and people often ask, how do you get this certain look on my image? Well, that's one of the ways. If I didn't have the top layer in there set to color, if I turn it off, the image would be way too colorful. So the colors are coming from that copy that's sitting on top. The contrast is being added by the middle layer, the one that's had median applied, and it's in overlay mode. And varying the opacity of it will control the strength. Now let's do another effect that I commonly do. This is one where I want the colors to look more muted, and it's what I call antique colors. So it's just a kind of feeling of antique-y. What I'm going to first do is pull all the color out of the image, and I'll do that by doing a black and white adjustment layer. And feel free to fine-tune this by clicking on your image and dragging to fine-tune the brightness of various areas. For now, I'm not going to be overly picky with the results there, but if this was an image that I really wanted to look good, I would be more concerned with what the black and white looks like. The main thing is we use a black and white adjustment layer to pull all the color out. Now we're going to end up putting in the color again. And I don't want to paint it in. I want the color to be based on the original. So let's work on the original layer. Let's duplicate it with a Command J, and let's put it on top. Then I'm going to change the blending mode at the top of my Layers panel to a choice called Overlay. And when I do, some color will come back into the image. But I want to blur that layer to soften it. So I'm going to go to the Blur submenu and choose Gaussian Blur. And I'm going to bring this up again until fine detail is gone, but I can still recognize shapes. And you can get it nice and soft if you want. It'll look okay. Then I find that this always makes the shadows too dark. And in this image, since there's a lot of dark stuff in it, the whole image is way too dark. To get some of that brightness back, I'm going to go down to the letters FX and choose Blending Options. We used this once before today, at the beginning of this session, I believe. We ended up pulling in this slider to hide the dark parts of a layer, and that's what we're going to do here. What I'm going to do is actually split the slider in half by holding down the Option key, Alt and Windows, and grabbing the right edge, pulling it over. And as I do, I should see more and more shadow detail return to the image. If you need to, you can bring in the far left edge as well, but most of the time I leave it pretty close to the end. Then, just like with the previous technique, this one is always too strong when I'm done. And I like that it's too strong because then I can dial it down and back up and really get it to where I want it to be. The problem is that the effect is made out of 2 layers, not just one. And so I need to do something where I can lessen the effect of more than 1 layer at a time. So I'm going to select both of these layers that make up the effect. And I could then adjust the opacity right now to affect both of those layers, but I just find it to be a cleaner look overall if I throw them in a folder. So I'll throw them in a folder, and then I'll adjust the opacity of the folder. I'll bring it all the way down to 0, and I can slowly bring it up. And the higher I bring it, the more I get that muted color look that can give it kind of an antique-y feel. And oftentimes I'll end up applying both this effect and the previous one called soft contrast to an image, and the two put together can give it a little bit of a kind of nostalgic feeling to an image. If you ever see any of my finished images of gas stations, I have a boatload of them, of vintage gas stations, almost all of them have had that done to them, and that's what gives them part of the overall look that they have. So what we have here, we have one layer that takes all the color out of the image to begin with. Then we take the color of the original image up here, we soften it so the transitions between the colors will be softer, because if you want an antique kind of look to it, things used to be hand colorized and they wouldn't be perfectly crisp on the edge, where one color ends and the next color begins. Blurring it gives us some of that, and using the mode called overlay ends up making it so the color is not applied in a straightforward, blatant way, so we can get a more muted color palette, which I find to be nice. The combination of that and the soft contrast can give an image a rather nostalgic feeling.